a mess of assessments, a mess of complexity about intervention and so on. I think the first thing you want to do is stand back and say, what the hell are the questions that these assessments are supposed to answer? What is it we're actually trying to achieve? And in the 25-year plan, the environment plan, which dominates the agricultural consultation, there's no longer a 25-year agricultural plan, and rightly so, it should be within the one arching framework. There are 3 or 4 core questions which need to be answered by the agricultural sector. The first one is about how the concept of natural capital applies to agriculture and what it means to say that natural capital is going up or going down. We need measurements to say, has that been achieved? And this is where the concept goes exactly in the grain of the way farmers should think about their assets. Natural capital is a very hard concept. It's not, with due respect to different people, fungible concept like sustainability, which people have been using for greenwashing and all sorts of other purposes. Everyone can say they're sustainable if they just put the right metrics together. Assets are what farmers work with. And assets go on balance sheets. And they're next to liabilities. And the difference between farming assets and most other assets is they're assets in perpetuity. Farmers are stewards of assets for future generations. You can't have depreciation and sustainable farming. So you have to use, forgive me being technical, but this is a hard concept, you have to have current cost accounting, assets in perpetuity, and you have to provide capital maintenance in your accounts to show that you have maintained that capital, so you have been stewards of those assets to pass on to the next generation. And where you see soil being depleted, that's because people are not putting in proper capital maintenance to maintain that soil. And that's good business practice to do that accounting. So the first issue is to have proper accounts. And my family were, my grandfather, my uncle were farmers, and my father was in horticulture. And I think back, I'm appalled the fact that they couldn't struggle to get a profit and loss account together. You know, if you're dealing with real hard assets, you need to know what they are, and you need to be able to measure them, and you need to know whether you're taking them forward or not.
Can I just intervene? Isn't this just the absence of a balance sheet for capital in accounting?
Yes, exactly, but the then and the balance sheet is not about valuing everything. It's about finding the assets at risk. In any business, you should have a risk register. And the assets at risk that you care about are those assets which, if you do not maintain them, will no longer go on giving you what nature gives you, which is for free. So you focus on those, you focus on the thresholds, the safe limits, etc. So that's the accounting framework. Just very quickly, the second question to ask, after having maintained your natural capital, are you enhancing it, is, if you want something, what is it you're providing to society? What are the public goods? What are they worth? And how much should you be paid? And why are they worth more than expenditure? And one of the things that's happened in the debate on farming is that everybody thinks what they would like to be subsidised for, and then thinks they can call it a public good. QED, give us the money. And I've seen that recently with food. Okay? People say, you know, suddenly food is a public good. Because technically it isn't, but it's a private good. But people go, food is a public good, agriculture is about producing food, therefore we should be subsidised. Try the following. Banking is about finance. Whether you have access to your ATM and can get your money out is a public good, because if you can't, the financial system falls. Therefore the government should subsidise ATMs and banking. No. Not in the form that I'm trying to describe here. And just financial viability. But what I wanted to say here is, you have to make that demonstrate. What are they? What are they worth? Now, I'm in favour of farmers coming forward with the propositions of what they can do to bid for the budgets that will be available. And they are fixed budgets. They're not going to be ever expanding. So farmers should say, this is what I can do, this is what I can offer, this is why the benefits are what they are, and this is why they should be subsidised. Just quickly, third is the polluter pays principle, which is in the farming consultation paper, and it is also in the 25-year plan. If the polluter pays principle is applied to agriculture, it would be the most radical thing that's happened to it for at least 50 years. We had the question about carbon. It's absolutely right there should be a price of carbon in agriculture. It's absolutely right that people who sequestrate carbon should be rewarded. And the going rate's about £18 a tonne, as I had set out in the cost of energy review. But if you emit the carbon, and the carbon from the soil and you let it decline, you should pay as a polluter. The nitrates question we had earlier, that's a pollution. It's economically efficient to charge a tax on nitrogen because of the cost that's imposed on the rest of the economy. This is just good economics. But the polluter pays principle would transform British agriculture and change the balance between the idea that smaller, more mixed farms, more organic farms are somehow more inefficient than these big, intensive farms. Well, we'd find out once the balance sheet was properly constructed and we had proper pricing of pollution. And then the final bit, which I won't spend any time on but might come back to, is about net environmental gain for any detriment done to natural capital in the economy. But those are the principles, those are the questions, and it's those questions to which the empirical answer about the metrics and the measurements have to now address themselves. They're all answerable, they're all practical, and they all provide a much sounder and more efficient basis for doing British agriculture.
Thank you very much. Well, what a fascinating opening statement. I'm now going to go to Edward Parsons. The reason I'm going to Edward is because, apart from having the responsibility of managing a lot of land, he's been in our working group, and we recently undertook two pilot studies, actually, to pressure test the progress we've made on this tool. And Edward, I thought, would be the perfect person to ask, how's it going? And did it work for you? What do you think is good about it, bad about it? Anything you want to say?
Thank you, Patrick, and I'd echo Dieter's comments about it's fantastic to be here. We're at a time in the industry where there's a lot of energy and enthusiasm behind seeing change, and the Secretary of State, hopefully, if he stays there and can get his department heading in the right direction, we should see some of that. I think from my point of view, Patrick, it really comes down to where we started at on this journey about metrics. It's very easy in everybody to have straightforward P&L accounts. It was interesting to hear earlier in the report that only 25% of farmers do actually have P&L accounts, which is quite scary. But when you look at that, it's quite easy to get depressed. We all know that agriculture in the UK is not terribly profitable. But it's not just the annual cash flow that we've got to worry about. It is a long-term stewardship that we have. Whoever's involved in the farming industry, in the rural industry, want to be able to hand over the assets that they look after to the next generation in a fundamentally better place. Now, circumstances where we have seen, all the best planning, and we've got a big HLS scheme on the estate as well, so 6 or 12 metre grass margins to every arable field. But there are circumstances that when the rain comes when you don't want it to, you see the spikes in the water courses. Now that is not only a waste of money, the fertiliser we're buying is going down the drain, but it's having a fundamental detrimental impact on the water courses. And that's an embarrassment. We were thinking we were pretty good, but actually we've got a long, long way to go. And that's just one example. But if we start, I didn't actually see the slide, but I'm assuming it sort of covered the areas of carbon footprint, water, soil, our ecosystem services. If we start looking at all those elements and in terms of the benefits that we deliver, I know on the estate we have 56 kilometres of rights of way. Now, I was looking at one of Dieter's reports, or Natural Cattle Committee's reports, a couple of weeks ago, and it highlighted the benefits to £3.80 a visit, and for school children it's about £3.40 a visit. Now, if we're involved with, that we own, doesn't matter, because the benefits that we all deliver are astronomical. And I think one of the big areas that we've all got to get sharper at is understanding it, quantifying it, and then shouting about it, because it's a big challenge for us, but we need to up our game to be able to engage with the public and let them know what we get up to.
Just a quick comment on how the process of participation in this working group, do you feel that there's, do you think we can get somewhere on it, and how do you feel about having assessed your own farm on more than one occasion against these emerging framework and metrics?
So we tried 4 farm sustainability tools, spent a day locked in a room doing the number crunching. The first time you do it, it's an absolute uphill struggle. But like anything, you do it the second and third time, it's going to get quicker and it's going to get more efficient. Patrick highlighted his 5 or 6 assessments that he gets assessed on an annual basis. We have a similar number, and I think there's not a farmer in the country who would rather say, right, I'm going to go and answer maybe 3 times the questions, sit down, do it once, and then the individual certification schemes can go and grab the information that they need to tick their boxes metaphorically, and it can be a far more efficient system. The actual process of getting to a system that we're all happy with and works with the right weightings is a big, big challenge. But I think there is energy there to do it, and I think I speak for you, Patrick, that anybody who has any interest and enthusiasm into this input would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you very much. Helen, we had a really excellent conversation just in preparation for this session now. And you, I know, well, we're both subject to annual organic inspections, and both of us have had a hand in the development of the standards and the assessment process. So I think what I want to ask you 2 questions. You raised the important point that there's the issue when you're measuring sustainability, you can either measure it by inputs or outcomes. And of course, we found in making the progress we've made that you have to do a combination of both. Yeah. It's not always possible to just measure the outcome because it's too flaky or the tools aren't good enough or other reasons, cheating, that sort of stuff. But if I'm honest, and obviously I've been inspected for many years for my organic inspection, at the end of the inspection, although I'm relieved, often vastly relieved that we got through, I don't really feel as if I know very much about whether my sustainability performance on my own farm is a yes or no decision, was necessary and will remain necessary. So our challenge as our working group is not to challenge the orthodoxy of existing certification schemes, but it's just to find a way of including everyone on the farming ladder in a progressively incremental journey rather than separating our community, which has had unfortunate other consequences, into yes or no. What do you think? I'm not leading the witness.
So I agree. I've been really interested in trying to move towards a better outcomes approach for a long time. I think it's very attractive because I completely agree that in a way, relying just on prescription, just on input standards, you shall do this or you shan't do that, is not enough, particularly in some areas, because you can not use pesticides or you can keep your animals in a certain conditions, but you still have to have great management to turn that into the result you're looking for. So it's not enough just to be doing the right things on paper and just be having the right sort of systems in place. You've got to manage those systems really well. And I think that's where an outcomes framework really helps you. And it's one of the reasons we've been investing a lot into that in the last little while, particularly around animal welfare, actually, because that's been an area where this is particularly sharp, where if you can still get poor animal welfare outcomes in theoretically good systems if you don't have that good management in place. And I, like you, I've been an organic farmer for 32 years or something. It's a pass-fail system, and I too want to know how I can drive my improvement beyond that. I think it's really helpful, the idea of every year having sort of thinking, right, where do I need to make my investments? Where can I still improve? How do I benchmark myself in these areas against other people who are doing a great job too? And I think we all need that sort of encouragement, mentoring, kick up the backside. And so an outcomes framework of some sort would be really helpful to try and help that happen. I think it also can reduce risk for certifiers too, and that's why we did it on the animal welfare side, because we needed to make sure that organic farming really worked. leverage through Go. So I think there's lots of reasons why that's a great idea. But I do also throw up some real cautionary tales from our experience of trying to do it with welfare outcomes. It is not easy, and I'm glad you recognise you will always need prescriptive standards too. You always need to actually have that belt and braces of the two. I worry when we start in some areas, and it may be that there are areas where we can do this already, maybe around carbon we can do it, that would be fantastic. But at the moment, those outcome metrics are nowhere near good enough to rely on a payment basis. I think we don't have the benchmark data, we don't have reliable monitoring, we don't have an agreed set in a lot of cases, and so I think we've got a lot of work to do to get us to the point where we can be using an outcomes framework for payment. And I'm even more nervous about that being consumer facing at this point in time. I think it's about self-improvement, learning, building that data set and enabling us to benchmark. I think those are the immediate benefits we could be driving towards.
Can I just push you on that particular point about outcomes and measurements in relation to soil carbon? Because we had one of the most important interventions I felt in the first session was, were you here when, maybe you hadn't arrived anyways, we had a point that was raised, why could not DEFRA pay farmers to be carbon stewards through soil carbon outcomes? And let me just slightly qualify the question. I think all our group, we completely agree with you that relying on the current technology that there is to measure accurately soil carbon would be a mistake. However, might it be possible, because this is a really golden prize in my view, since Michael Gove has said he wants to increase soil fertility in this country, to use a systems-based approach. If you sow grassland, if you farm organically, etc., if you use land management systems where data can show typically good outcomes.
So I think at the moment you have to look at the science and say these approaches lead to those outcomes. That's not about, you verify the outcomes through scientific analysis every now and again. You try and make sure that those systems are delivering those outcomes. There's ongoing research around that. But I think most of the time you are paying for the systems of management that you know are delivering those outcomes. But that is a slightly different question. And actually that is more where we are today. But we are thinking about how do we make sure we're driving the kind of outcomes we really want to see. I think there are still values judgments about what those are, and there are still many ifs and buts, even on soil carbon. Every soil will have a different potential, and we need to understand the potential of different soils. In some cases, you actually might not want soil organic matter to increase if you're trying to...
Like a peat bog.
Yeah. Or, there's some key things to be done around protecting peat. So there are ifs and buts, but I think that we need to have that continuous improvement cycle of encouraging the right kind of practices, checking that they are delivering the outcomes we want, feeding that back into our standard setting. That virtuous circle would be a good one to have in place.
But you know about the 4 per 1,000, the capital meal.
I do indeed. It's very similar to the
and so, of course, there haven't been many countries in the world yet that have delivered on that, and in part it's because of exactly what you just said, that the reliable means of establishing soil carbon gain is a challenging field at the moment. But do you think it's something we should be working on?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think increasing soil carbon and carbon in vegetation. So trees too. Trees and soils are a huge part of the picture from all sorts of points of view, and so the more we can encourage farmers to be improving their soil carbon and planting more perennial crops and trees on their farms too, it's going to be a big part of the picture. I'd like to see them pay for it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Andrew Sells, Chairman of Natural England, thank you so much for joining us. Now, you obviously have a particular focus on some aspects of this metrics of sustainability and categories that we discussed. What's your immediate response, and what would you like to say about this area?
Thank you very much, Patrick. Well, I'd like to start by saying congratulations on getting a wonderful audience of farmers. And I never really meet farmers without starting by saying that I want to get off my chest an apology for the failings in the countryside jurisdiction schemes and the other schemes which are definitely causing you all a great deal of grief. Please don't send me any more emails about it. I know how bad it is. But also there's a message in there that we've got to make them all a lot better in the future. And in fact, I'm trying to persuade the Secretary of State now that, and somebody asked a very good question about this, I think after he'd gone, of Minette, could we not roll forward some of the HLS schemes where they're providing environmental benefit, where everybody believes that they are actually doing that? And we did that apparently in 2003-4 for a scheme for a year or two. I think it might need European consent, but I would very much like to do that. So, as you rightly say, Patrick, we come at it from a slightly different perspective. Our job is to conserve and enhance the natural environment. And I think we all know that for the last 40 years, what we've done has not worked. And we have got to have truly radical thinking. And we have a truly radical thinker here, my friend Dieter, who's come up with a brilliant idea. And what we have to do, I think, is make that work. I hesitate ever to disagree with somebody who's an Oxford professor, but at least I have the benefit of being a chartered accountant. And I do understand balance sheets, and I do understand asset values. And Patrick encouraged me to be slightly challenging of Dieter, so I'll throw out a challenge to Dieter, which I know he'll respond to, which is that I do think some assets are very considerably easier to value than other assets, and we have sort of arrived at the conclusion that landscapes are difficult to value, that species, particularly species which might almost go extinct, are very difficult to value, and we, Natural England, together with the National Heritage Lottery Fund and others, have funded an 8 million project to try and rescue 20 species from extinction and save another 80, hopefully. Now, I very much doubt whether those accounts that Dieter's going to produce are actually going to show that his money well spent. And in fact, I take a slightly different line here. We have a moral duty to try and save species with whom we share the planet. It isn't a matter of economics or accounting. So, while I'm a great fan of the natural capital concept of this accounting, I think we've got to make sure that it doesn't overemphasize the effect on assets that we can easily value and underestimate those where we're struggling. That's very kind of you. I also have another concern. I wouldn't put any harm in that natural capital is a concept very easily grasped in the concept of rivers and catchments and nitrates and whatever. But most of us don't think we live in a river catchment. We know we live in Oxfordshire or Wiltshire or wherever it is. And national parks don't think along the lines of river catchments. And planning, which plays a very significant part in the work we do, and applying natural capital criteria to whether something is beneficial or not, planning doesn't operate on river catchments either. So we can adopt this concept, but we mustn't over-adopt it. So I think that's probably enough from me for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I noticed Dieter nodding, so just not to let you off the hook completely, I want to challenge you in another way. We've got a category, rather unpopulated, it has to be said, of social and human capital. The cultural elements would come into that as well, and maybe almost valuing the the pricing the on value aspects that Andrew referred to. Do you not think that natural capital community overlooked this area, or rather came to recognising that it has an important place in the valuation a bit late?
Okay. Let me take each of those challenges in turn, because I think it's extraordinarily important not to oversell valuation. So I agree with Andrew, and it's very important to also not claim that everything can be put under the hat of natural capital. What's interesting about bringing natural capital in the picture is in the past we've just thought about physical capital, man-made capital, and excluded the natural capital. But the idea that because you bring the natural capital in the frame, that somehow you're not taking cultural capital or social capital or human capital into account, of course you want to take those into account. Okay? So this isn't a kind of imperialism of the argument, it's the assertion that there is natural capital at stake here, and in agriculture it's incredibly important, of which the soil is a very important part. So I think the social human criticism, there may be economists running around claiming everything can be done in cost-benefit analysis terms, in economic terms, etc. That's just bad economics. Right? You know, it's not an imperialism. So fine, those should be part of the frame. And there are lots of areas there where there are public goods too. And mention was made by Michael Gove of the importance of rural communities, etc. These are important parts of the social fabric of our country, and that social fabric has a cultural dimension, a human dimension, and a very personal dimension for the people who are attached to places. So I don't have any difficulty with that. Now, the other point, the issue which is really substantive, is the one that says, look, some assets are more difficult to value than others. An economist knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. Okay? This is a really serious criticism, okay, and to which there are two basic replies. The first is that a lot of economists run around saying they're valuing, you know, this view or this particular park, and they say that, you know, St James's Park is worth £2,562,000, but this view of the river is only worth £3,462. It's just nonsense. Right? It's not what we're doing. Nobody is claiming that something is, in a deep sense, valued at a financial number, and certainly not at a financial number only. It's a different question. The questions are following. How much should we spend of scarce public money and private money to protect and enhance conflicting and competing possible bits of our natural environment we could look after? There isn't an open checkbook here. We'll be very lucky if you've got £3 billion left in 5 years' time. And for those who voted for Brexit, you probably voted for a substantially lower amount of money to go into the agricultural sector than you've had in the past. It's not an absolute, that's just a prediction. The Treasury and Britain now has back in control of that spending in a way that the farming community could say, Treasury, you can't do anything about it because the European community has decided it. So, you know, you should see what's coming. And the health budget versus the agricultural budget is going to be there in spades.
Can I just...
So I just wanted to... So we're trying to work out how much of this money should be spent on this particular landscape, or that landscape, or this particular soil development, or whatever, where there are competing ends. And you know, in the end, a certain amount of money will be spent on each of these things, and that's a number. And you have to justify that number, and you justify it by trying to explain, as you did very eloquently, you know, well, this is the benefit to the public. This is how many visitors come here. This is how many children use this facility. These are the benefits. So that's why you do it. And it is true that some things are harder than others, but then I would caution you with the following point. Would you rather be roughly right or precisely wrong? Because not putting value on any of these assets is precisely wrong. And that's why these assets are in the mess they are. And when you come to the Treasury or any other part of government, if you can't put numbers on things, if you can't express what sort of money you want spent on different things, the answer, unfortunately, for the last 40 years has been quite close to zero for absolutely precious assets. And that comes to one final point I wanted to make, which is this. You know, you say, Andrew, about species. Okay? Well, one of the things that we do in natural capital is really value the fact that nature can go on giving us for free the services it delivers forever. And so normally when you value something, you look at the discounted value of the crop or corn or whatever it is on the field and say that's what it's worth. But I use the example, I use it in my book on natural capital, of say something like a herring stock. Okay? If you don't drive the herring stock in the North Sea below the threshold where it can go on giving you that stock forever,
then for 100,000 years people could eat herring. And if you work out the economic value of something in perpetuity, giving it year and year and year, if you extinguish that species at any point along the line, you cut off all those benefits in the future. So good economics says that things that are in danger of going below the threshold are really important and they have very high values. Well, it helps, but if you just go and enjoy the beauty of them, that's incredibly important. Right? And it's not just back consumption. So I think that actually we can deal with these things, but the danger is that people think that economists are trying to be imperialists over this. What we're trying to do is answer those questions I had at the beginning, which is, are you being good stewards? Do you deserve the money for the public goods? What are the public goods? And are polluters paying for the costs that they impose? And again, we have to decide what those costs are. Final point, when people say, oh, but we can't work out who the diffuse pollution people are, I think Manette made this point. Just see the technology that's coming. We will know what's happening in every square metre of the land, and we'll be able to read actually in 3D what's happening below it. So diffuse polluters have got away with the past. Forget it. We'll know exactly where the slurry goes in the river. We'll know exactly what's going on in the land, and therefore we can tax the polluters, and it will not be a practical difficulty to do that.
Okay, well, I want to come back at you because you didn't answer my last question, which is human capital in the form of public health. Don't forget that Michael Gove said last week in London, the primary purpose of agriculture is to produce healthy food, and Helen said, we're eating this stuff. You'll know from our hidden costs of UK food report that the pound of externalities for every pound spent on food divides into 50-50 split between damage to public health and damage to natural capital. Why haven't your community included health in its remit until now?
I think, 2 points. I don't know whether I agree exactly it's 50-50, but your point is extremely well made. So if you go and have a look at, I'm sure people have got many more busy things to do in their life, but if you actually go and have a look at the stuff we produce in the Natural Capital Committee, the big estimates that come out for the benefits, the real public goods, are things like air quality, right? And if you think about, most people live in cities. If you think of a city like London, the things you can do by planting trees, the right kind of trees, greening the components of it, the air quality direct health benefits were the biggest benefit you could find. But there's huge evidence on mental health, on children's obesity, on exercise, on just pleasure, the tourist industry benefits, all of these things. No, we definitely take those into account.
Which in your valuation framework, it doesn't show.
Well, I think if you read the third State of Natural Capital report, and that's called SOM 3, you'll find a valuation in there which has those things in spades. We have done that, Patrick, and like you, it's really important that we do that.
Thank you. Unless have any of the other panellists got additional burning questions you want to ask each other, or I'll open it up? Okay, who would like to enlarge the conversation, please?
Martin.
Who's got a microphone? Okay, thanks. And then Sarah.
Martin Steer, Deer Park Farm, an organic farmer. For me, as I go around the farm, I've got that dreaded phone in my pocket all the time, which rings at the most inconvenient moments. But the great benefit is it's got a GPS inbuilt in it, which is incredibly accurate, and it's got a very, very good camera video, as everyone knows. I get my mental stimulation from the fact that as I sit on the tractor, I can photograph the lapwing chicks, fledglings that were just in the bit of ground that I decided not to top the thistles on. I can photograph the goldfinches, the hares, and last year, for the first time in 10 years, barn owls, and I've actually got photographs of measuring the chicks' weights and everything. There's a gentleman here, can you help me with the name? Tim Hopkins, with his mapping app. He came to stay with us the other day, and I took the photograph that I'd taken of my barn owl in the box, which is pinned to my farm. I would love to be able to upload that to the cloud where my Soil Association certification is, I'd also like to be able to send it to Natural England. When I do my HLS, I have to do soil samples and send them in, which I really enjoy doing. It forces me to do it. And all this information is out there. If we could get everything through a decent mapping app, which is in with the RPA's figures, so that, you know, why have we got people flying over the country, photographing our hedges? I know where the hedges are. It's all the hedges are all wrong on my farm. I've got a deer park wall all the way around it, all mapped as a hedge. I should be able to just click on the RPA system, change it all, show where the bumblebees are. We had Cheshire Wildlife Trust. I took part in a bumblebee survey with them the other day. I know where the bumblebees are on my farm. We have to trust farmers more. We're not all rogues out there. The sad thing is, the people who are bad, nobody's got the guts to go and really tackle them and penalise. It's very, very expensive. There are farmers I know who've trashed land deliberately. They're giving the industry a bad name, but the majority of farmers are incredibly proud of what they're doing on their land. And I think somewhere where we could upload all those good photographs on a common site should be part of part of any accountability or certification or whatever you want to call it.
So I think you're saying that you're just coming up with insights as to how we could affect this harmonisation process and involve farmers more closely with it.
We can, and,
So,
we need to be able to give that information to all the different bodies.
I think we make three really, really good points. First of all, can I congratulate you on your conservation efforts? They sound terrific. I'm tempted to ask you a question, but I think I'll get an embarrassing answer. There's the whole crowd. But I'm going to ask you this question. Almost all of you, no doubt, fill in an annual tax return and send it to HMRC. And if you've had a really bad experience with the HMRC, please raise your hand. Has anybody had a really bad experience here with the RPA? Okay, so what I would like to do, and I'm talking to ministers about this, is moving the whole regulation and databases to a much more trusted basis like the HMRC. Most people in this country honestly fill in their tax return, and they do it once a year, and they understand the need for it. And they understand that if they actually fiddle it seriously, the HMRC are going to come down on them like a ton of bricks. But they take much, much more on trust. Natural England is determined to work much more on trust with people and organisations, and trust people to do newt licensing, bat licensing, all sorts of other things that we've always done ourselves. Trust you lot collectively. There will be one or two rogues, probably not in this room, but out there, and we'll have to find a way of coming down on them. But I agree with you. So you upload your data, you put it in your annual return, you tell us everything, and then once every 20 years you may come out as a sample, somebody we come and test. I would like to change the whole regime. It isn't in my gift, but at least that's what I can argue for.
Now, I mentioned at the last questioning session that agroecology, who are picking up questions. Have you got another one, Richard? Yes. Yes, thank you. Can we have it? Yes, here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All very interesting talks there. We have a lady called Tracy Wathen-Jones who writes, agroecology is an excellent umbrella to drive forward sustainable farming, but how do we ensure farmers can still farm and not be forced into becoming only nature conservationists? What's the best balance to aim for?
Well, that's a bit off subject. But who would like to take that?
There's only one.
How much emphasis you put on productivity against the other
Oh, I just didn't understand the question. Okay, here's the question reframed. We have 10 categories which we've arbitrarily divided sustainability into, they need to be weighted. So, for instance, for Natural England, maybe a greater emphasis will be put on the natural capital element of things, biodiversity, etc., whereas for somebody who's concerned with soil or with public health, there might be a different emphasis. Is that the question? It's behind the question. It's a matter of how you weight and value these things. I mean, that would be interesting for you all to comment on.
I think from my point of view, the underlying first step is if you don't have a profitable business which is sustainable, the environment isn't going to be maintained. So I'd almost, there's an option to take out the sustainability or the financial element from this metrics, so it would stand completely alone and make sure you have a profitable business first. Then you can look at the environmental elements and measure those and weight those in a separate way.
But you need to ask yourself a question. Why do farms make so little money? Okay? Why are the rates of return so low on farms? Okay? And so if you start to unpack that, and I got myself in terrible trouble in the pages of Farmers Weekly, which is the new experience for me, one of the answers is, look at the system you put in place. If you pay people for owning land, which is farmed, then that payment will just be capitalised in the land price. So we have an agricultural system which produces land prices from which it's almost impossible to imagine that anyone could make a normal rate of return. And it was like when we used to have mortgage tax relief. People thought it's a great idea, give you tax relief on mortgages. So what happens? The house price capitalises the mortgage tax relief, and nobody's better off, and entrants are worse off. And you see that in farming. I mean, isn't it absurd that on the CAP, you have a special thing to subsidise young farmers to come into farming because you create a land prices so high they can't come into it. It's incredible. So when you think about unwinding the CAP, you're actually thinking about, when you take away the basic farm payment, fundamentally changing the underlying economics of farming from one in which you just have a capitalisation of lower money that comes in subsidy to one that's related to what you do. And I think that that hasn't been appreciated enough. Now, there are other reasons why land prices have been driven up, inheritance tax, all sorts of other exemptions. But you can't escape the consequence that if you subsidise things in particular ways, they will be capitalised in asset prices. So that's part of it. But the other part of the question, always, so, I mean, Michael Gove went to this very well, I thought. It's this idea that, you know, there's the environment over here. We're basically in the business of producing food. There's these awkward green people over here and environmental stuff, and we can deal with that when we're rich enough to deal with that. But, you know, this is the first priority. And the fundamental point in the 211 white paper on the natural choice, which is where all this natural capital stuff started from, and the fundamental point actually in the 25-year plan, the agriculture thing, is they're not in conflict. You know, you have to put the environment at the heart of the economy, and I don't understand how you could run a farm without taking care of the natural assets you've actually got, the productive base of what you're doing. Now, that doesn't mean that food is not part of it. It's what nature helps to give us for free, plus our labour and the inputs we put with it to produce the outputs. But, you know, we've seen what trashing the environment does. You can see the damage to the soil. It's measured, and it's going to be measured even greater in the future. So I just deny the trade-off between the two in the first place. And I think that's what fundamentally all of this is about. Good stewards, the good stewards of the natural capital they've got, because the natural capital is the asset that produces the food, which would make them a decent living and a profit. And there's nothing wrong with part of your benefits coming farming, that you help other people enjoy the landscape, enjoy the biodiversity, but that biodiversity supports your own production and outputs. And that's the thinking that's required here. And this is good, it's common sense economics. This is economically efficient to do this. To not tax polluters is inefficient. To subsidise people for owning land is inefficient. And high land prices are very inefficient. This is all going to enhance economic growth, not what most people think, that this is just some nasty green stuff that gets in the way that stops people making profits.
Dieter, I'm going to carry on with Patrick's permission, being slightly challenging. Good stewardship you talk about. You talk about economic interest. So I've got an example now, not far from home. an internet millionaire, has bought up quite a lot of land. Okay? He has no interest in it, no knowledge, but he just claimed the basic payments and that about it. He has let the land to one farmer, I don't know how much he pays him, and it's now over 15, nearly 20 years, and this farmer, all he's done is thought to maximise the return, and he's grown maize on it every year for all those years. And he's really compacted it. Each year my wife and I see another little bit of the topsoil running down the River Avon. It's actually really been trashed. And I don't think we've got this, it's not a question of restoring that soil, it's a question of how we're going to stop these people doing that.
Well, let's go back to your example, okay? It's got two parts. The first part is, people think of land as a financial investment without necessarily interest in the farming. Why? Well, it's exempt from inheritance tax for a start, okay? Secondly, you've got a guaranteed flow of income from the basic farm payments, okay? Now, I think it's really important that people can pass on their farms to the next generation. But look at inheritance tax. What it says is you can stay on farming till you're dead and still pass on the land. If you did like everybody else did and passed on your assets 7 years before you died, we'd have a lot younger age population of farmers. That's an aside. Okay, so inheritance tax isn't a problem, but it's a very attractive reason why people buy this stuff. And the annuity that comes out, if you're a pension fund, an infrastructure fund, etc., from the basic farm payment, makes this like a utility asset. So we ought to go to those incentives, and I got myself in even more trouble in the page of the Farmers Weekly by suggesting we actually ought to look at all the subsidies and ask, are they justified? And when I mentioned inheritance tax, my email box has never been more full in my life. Only second to the red diesel question and the carbon content of diesel. But the second thing is, you say about this maize farming, you know, Andrew, much better than I, the maize farming around the Somerset levels and what caused the flooding, etc. Well, look, the guy is not paying for the pollution they're causing, right? I mean, when I looked at the Somerset levels flooding case, the farmers actually wanted the Environment Agency to spend X tens of millions dredging out the soil that had come off their maize fields because they'd left them unprotected. Okay? So the question, if you look at maize production and the intensive chemical contents that go with it, and the loss of soil that goes with it, and the carbon depletion, the producer pays principle make a hell of a lot of difference to that farm, and we should apply it. Now, will it be enough? Well, it might not be, but it'd be a lot better than what we've currently got. Now, there is one version of that, which is a lot of the water companies are getting into the business of paying farmers not to do things like leave their land exposed in winter. You've got the N-Trade example of Wessex Water and Poole Harbour, etc. These are really quite interesting ideas where water companies are realising we have to change the practice of farming to get the outputs. But it's the wrong way round. It's the water customers, me, and the water company, my representative, paying the polluter not to pollute. There's no other area in Britain. Imagine going to a coal power station and say, look guys, we'll pay you not to emit the carbon from your coal power station. We would never do that, and we shouldn't do it in this territory. And that's how you get change in practice in the farm example you gave me.
Helen, there we go.